Good evening and welcome to the Joko. Welcome to the Joko conversation this week as we look at this moment of social collapse in the United States. I am Brother Yusuf, a professor of composition and creative writing and literature, a poet, and someone who organizes through the arts and through my work in education. And I am joined in those efforts, indeed invited into this effort by my partner and comrade, Tasha. Hi, Tasha.
Hi, Yusuf, and greetings, folk who join us. And thank you. We express our appreciation for our viewers, folks who tune in with us and check out what we're talking about. Always delightful to see and encouraging as we continue to build, right? As working class builders of this kind of site. We are not right
Right.
subsidized creators who
Real.
have all day to devote to content creation and development and all these different kinds of things. And so we do what we do, and we grow at our pace and just continue to try to put meaningful drops in the bucket.
Yes.
Right. And we satisfy ourselves that we are offering something substantial. So yes, please do like, subscribe, share, and comment, as we always say, right? And comment. And I think in our last conversation, we did get a couple of comments, which was kind of nice. Thank you for cooperating with that request, right? But all means, this is the aspect of Joko that is Joko conversations, and we really would love that interaction. So we start as we always do, acknowledging and forefronting our gratitude for being in the personal lineages that we are in, recognizing that something in that dynamic swirled around to make us folk who are centered in and are concerned about and devoted to participating in the creation of a just world, participating in the work of pulling the world out of this morass of ism and schism and oppression and exploitation and all of the things that we are familiar with, right? As we talk about, all the things that need to be fixed so that human and other sentient life can thrive and flourish, and happiness is possible. It's actually possible. And it's a shame in this cultural system that even that notion is being painted as and projected as foolish or immature or naive or whatever it is. It's the notion, right, that peaceful coexistence is not possible. What a dangerous notion, right, for creatures that build the world in our image. We literally make our world according to our belief system. So, let's remember, okay, let us remember that better human relations are possible and continue to strive for it. And we always uplift our African family. We are members of the African global family and uplift those ancestors who have who dedicated their creativity and courage and cleverness and uh, long suffering and all of that to also um, making this just world, making this world just, making this world a place for human thriving. Um, and have actually absolutely have made tremendous gains, though the dominant narrative, I haven't heard that phrase in a long time, but though the dominant narrative would have us see ourselves as the perpetual underdog, the reality is the work that the ancestors of our group who have participated in that work and the ancestors of other groups of oppressed people who have contributed to that work have absolutely made inroads, have absolutely um, helped the clay feet of the giant to crumble. And so we center ourselves in the understanding of that victory, that victorious posture, um, and what it actually looks like, right? Um, and we do not forget that any work that we do in this Turtle Island is at the hospitality of the ancestors of the First Nations people, and indeed at the hospitality of the First Nations people themselves, who continue to um, press and create and innovate to maintain their sovereignty and their cultural situation and their vision and uh, their worldview. Uh, of course, their languages and their lands, and we are in their unceded territories, and we absolutely acknowledge that and reject, the inevitability, the sense of inevitability of the colonial arrangement. All things pass, all things pass, and this is as the Chinese are saying so often. You hear them saying so often in public conversations these days. No, we're pretty old. We're not as concerned as you may think about the
Mm-hmm.
right about the uh, volatility of the Western history. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
you may be consumed and impressed with your sense of greatness. We are not. We understand ourselves to be old. So there are
Mm-hmm.
viable perspectives. There are perspectives that we can assume, right? There are stances that we can assume that are valid, that are real, that will
Yeah.
fortify us, right? As we do this work. And so we always start by making some kind of statements and some kind of indications in those directions. And so, having done that, I will pass the mic back to you, good brother Yusuf, so we can start this conversation.
Well, and it is a conversation about this moment, and in keeping with your opening, and your putting it in context, right? Is what's as we are living through crisis, and it's a crisis that's been building, um, a perpetual crisis.
Right.
And I heard, I was watching and listening to George Galloway interview Vijay Prashad earlier, and specifically around what's happening in Nepal,
Mm-hmm.
and primarily, and plus a few other stories they touched on. Um, but Vijay Prashad, right? He used this language that the world is hurting, right? The people of the world are hurting, and they're and they have been hurting, and the ways in which this this moment, right? The desperation
Mm-hmm.
with which the colonial system, the it, it, the completely inseparable from the capitalist development of this modern era. Um, and I was thinking about Frantz Fanon's dying colonialism, right? Because I think Vijay Prashad used that language somewhere in the talk also, right? This dying colonialism, and
Mm-hmm.
I thought, right, yes, right, that's that collection of essays by Frantz Fanon, right, a dying colonialism from the 1950s. In that moment, in these various kinds of manifestations, right, of the anti-colonial national liberation movements, the Afro-Asiatic world, the Pacific, the
Mm-hmm.
islands of the Pacific, um,
Mm-hmm.
and revolution in Latin America, right, um, and what we've been living with, with the emergence of the now post-colonial, the independent states, right, of the global South, of the East, um, the ways in which revolutionary spirit, revolutionary practice, and path in those places were distorted, right? So we've had a dying colonialism, and we've been living in we've been in the afterlife of colonialism, the walking deadness of neo-colonialism, and that too now is taking headshots, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the system, and so the system is in increased crisis, and the United States as the former. It's hard to say it isn't, or wasn't anyway at a particular moment, the world hegemon,
Mm-hmm.
um, and has not been, or has been on a downward trajectory really for a long time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is reaching that point where the the violence and the various forms of violence, physical and otherwise, um, and particularly the physical now, though,
Mm-hmm.
that was projected outward, through empire, through imperial adventure, is now directed inward, right? Um, and manifesting in many ways, right? Just as that revolutionary moment of the mid 20th century manifested not only in the national liberation movements, but in the various desegregation movements
Mm-hmm.
that we look to the United States as kind of the paragon of, but that was also having effect, and there were versions of that, right, in Caribbean states, particularly those that didn't become independent, remain part of the British Virgin Islands, for example, stuff like that, right? But and within the metropoles, right, where there were versions of Jim Crow by custom, you might say, right? So all of that, right? in Australia, in these other colonial places, right? Civil rights movements, the Kuri people, the native people of Australia, and their movement, right, at that time, right. So that whole, all of that, right, all these various ways that the the global South, the colonized, the enslaved, the formerly enslaved, the neo-colonized, right, have put the empire in crisis, and we've been living with the backlash of it since. That in this country, as as hegemony slips away, and that the focus becomes even more internal, because there's always the domesticate, you know the
Mhm.
low intensity warfare against the colonized peoples of the United States,
Absolutely.
primarily through militarized police forces, right?
Absolutely.
But all of that's being intensified now, right? And actual militarization, right, before our eyes, right? Is thinking about that again today, hearing people talk about, or as the right wing is responding to the assassination of one of their own, um,
Mhm.
you know, talking about the riots in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles knows what a so-called riot looks like. Right?
Mhm.
There ain't been no riots, right? But again,
Mhm.
that's this, they're just able to assert. That's part of the, just assert, right? Doesn't matter if there's no evidence for that, or and don't offer an explanation, right, or anything like that. So,
Mhm.
um, so this is the moment we're in, right? And it's the question of, is it sustainable, right? I mean, we labeled this collapse, right? The social collapse in the United States, and
Mhm.
um, I've been saying that, or at least raising that question with you in our private conversations of, the difficulty of seeing a way out, really since the January 6th
Mhm.
insurrection event. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
the right wing specifically, right, is does not
Mhm.
seem committed, right, to what people ordinarily think of as a democratic process.
Mm-mm.
Um, you know, so and as I heard someone say it the other day, listening to a young woman's commentary, there is no way out of it. There's only going through it
Mhm.
at this point. So.
Mhm. Because it's right. I mean, I like the language you used earlier. Living in the walking with the Walking Dead neo-colonial uh, reality that we've been in the post-colonial uh, death march since independence, since the end of
Mhm,
colonialism. Because right, being mindful of historical processes, and we're talking about movements of these large entities, you know,
mhm,
then you're just in a different time frame, even though it can be witnessed and it can be predicted and and whatnot,
mhm,
right? um you were just talking about larger entities going through movement and transformation and responding to this, that, and the other, right? And then different kinds of surprise elements get thrown in. The well,
mhm,
I can't say that climate change was not uh, anticipated in during the colonial period, because actually it was.
mhm.
Those predictions
Yes, it
were
was.
they
Mhm,
began to be articulated, right? What is gonna the forward visioning of what's going to
mhm,
happen. The carbon in the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and etc.
Mhm.
The generation of all of these kinds of things. So anyway, right? You can always see in broad outline, but yes, in terms of this being in the moment, coming into the moment of the apparent collapse, right? And all of the dynamics attending to that, and the piece that is anxious for every human being, right? Is the everyone is expecting and anticipating the outburst of
Mhm.
interpersonal random violence, as well
Mhm.
as directed political violence and whatnot,
And
right? So
organized, but yeah,
say that again.
and organized violence, right? Yeah,
And
that's
organized violence, right?
as you
And
said though,
also,
that and political, you know,
and
int
right,
intentionally political violence. Yes.
as part right, that is coming from that same sector of U.S. society that has long been recognized by the state's own analysis, right,
Mhm.
as the
Mhm.
defenders of domestic terrorism. You know,
Mhm.
now
Exactly.
the right, so now
For
these
the vast majority, right? There's
the vast
um,
majority,
a chart that was being shared earlier, actually put together by the
yeah,
ADL.
uh-huh,
Showing the greatest threat is
back in the day,
right wing, white
right,
nationalist, right wing
right,
terrorism
right,
is the number one
right,
threat in this country and responsible for most what
yes,
are described as terrorist or hate terrorist acts or hate crimes, right? So
absolutely, and that doesn't stop being true. That doesn't stop being
right,
true.
that's right.
Um, and in the way that one of the things that we one of the main features of this social collapse, right, part of this raison d'etre for Joko, is that breakdown in, excuse me, in commonly understood uh commonly understood fact, commonly understood truths, commonly understood um narratives that are related to, that are science based, that are related to natural phenomena. I'm trying to use all
Yeah.
this language that describes, at least the that moment of holding those uh those values, to be able
Hmm.
to be able to challenge something on the basis of it not being research based or science
Hmm.
based or
Hmm.
whatnot, had its own currency, right? Had its own currency. And as that, you know, began to obviously break down, and these, and so we all repeating that which we know, but not how long it was underestimated, right? In
Hmm.
terms of say, the reach and influence of the climate denial discourse, right? And how much there was just this kind of dismissal of the uh, whatever the crazy people, or the uneducated people, or the whatever dismissive language is used, who are falling for this discourse, who are being influenced by this discourse, this kind of very dismissive n- attitude toward that, when this is absolutely a cornerstone of uh, the the uh, uh, she gets stuck in suspended animation. A cornerstone, a very important, a key element of the rise and the to prominence, right? This it running itself on spurious narratives and misinformation of all kinds, and disinformation of all kinds. You name it, it's there, right? Um, And so this, there's this kind of real kind of triumph of darkness on in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And so the collapse of the rational, the collapse
Yeah.
of the reasonable, the collapse of that, is an essential thing. And as people become more pressured, right? When we talk about the political violence of impoverishment that's enacted by the state, right? That long term compressing of the masses in these precarious, situations, as the poet Quinoa says, keeping
Mhm.
people skating on a stress blade, right?
Mhm.
Deliberate activity, and it is absolutely violence. It is absolutely violence, and it is
Mhm.
political violence, right?
And it's a form of political violence. Yes, that's right.
It's yes, it's
Violence of
political.
the state,
Absolutely, it's a yes,
violence
it's a,
of the economic order.
absolutely violence of the economic order, perpetuated deliberately,
Hmm.
right, in class interests. So it
Hmm.
is absolutely
Yeah, that's
a
right.
power manipulate. It is not an inevitable. It is not
Yes.
the invisible hand. It's not
Mhm.
mystic or mysterious, right? As we see, for instance, with the big beautiful bill. I have no reason to call it anything else. The big beautiful bill. Um, the deliberate. Uh, uh, of course, it's a money grab. Uh, re, more redistribution of
Upward.
the collective wealth, right, to this few,
Mhm.
to the few, to the 1%, who will grow, right, to they'll become the what, point 1% or whatever,
Right.
the 100%, or however you would say that. Let me not get to trumping and making up math and percentages, but that can't happen. But that the social consequences of that are predictable. The pressures, the mass, we're talking about impoverishment, we're talking about homelessness, we're talking about lack of access to health care and health maintenance, we're talking about malnutrition, we're talking about all of the uh, 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 forces, right, of that the those folks that are in control of, right, the forces of production, or the means of production, can wield, right, against
Hmm.
can wield against the masses. So that is the fundamental political violence, as you said, this ongoing story of violence, of political violence. And of course, we know that and we keep in the forefront that all dissent, fundamentally, effective dissent, um, against capitalism, against racism and white supremacy, against um, all of these power relations, is met with uh, imprisonment, is met with
All
uh,
kinds of violence,
all of the violences. It's met
and
with all
it has
violences.
always been. That's right.
And has always been,
Yeah.
so what is going to make this moment different, except that we haven't seen it, though people are, of course, folk who have been in the predictive mode and have been in the projective mode, have been talking about McCarthyism forever, right? Now
Hmm.
you're hearing more about, oh, here comes anticipating that McCarthyism atmosphere. Anticipate, when is the next series of Palmer raids going to,
Right.
when
Well,
is
they've been promised, right? They have been promised despite no knowledge of
yes, yes,
let me say no investigation,
right,
or only preliminary investigation, but even before that, right? There were already um, assertions of who is responsible, and
yeah,
uh, um, and on whom the state is going to crack down, right? And all dissenting voices,
yes,
anybody that is identified as the so-called radical left,
right,
including the actual radical left,
Right.
but anybody left of far right, right? And so yeah, it's already been declared. But and you used the language I found interesting, like a new or an era of darkness, right? This period of darkness. And I've heard that, I've seen that before. Also, references to a new dark age emerging.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it struck me about conversations I was having with some colleagues really 20 years ago, during the
Mhm.
George W. Bush administration.
Mhm.
As I mean, again, in comparison, right? People almost like that was manageable or whatever,
Yes.
right? And this was
Right.
the
That's
this
word of
was
the
the
future.
Patriot Act. So it's really just a continuity. But I mean,
Yes.
that's on the one hand, that's just how intensified and again internalized it's become. But
Yeah.
the conversations we were having at the time,
Yeah.
um, with this conversation from administration officials and administration supporters about alternative facts
Right.
and known unknowns or unknown knowns and all this other
Right.
double talk.
Right.
The and the even more explicit um in, introduction is the wrong word, um you know imbrication, intertwining,
Mhm.
platforming of religion, and particularly
Yeah.
evangelical Christian religion
Yeah.
primarily, but
Yes.
Christianity generally, right?
Mhm.
Certainly the more any um, conservative sectors of any of the denominations, but
Mhm.
particularly evangelical fundamentalist Christianity, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
remember our conversations about the or using the language of an attack on the Enlightenment,
Uh-huh.
an attack on the Enlightenment, right? And Enlightenment values, Enlightenment principles. I mean, the language you used, right? And what is
Uh-huh.
the Enlightenment known for, right? The privileging of reason, the rational process, right?
Yes.
The an embrace of the scientific method, etc., right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and
Yes.
part of that, I mean, we talk about the Dark Ages. It's the
Mhm.
Enlightenment scholars
Mhm.
that labeled it the Dark Ages, and
Mhm.
in some ways revealing their own biases,
Mhm.
primarily because of the central role of religion and
Mhm.
the Catholic Church, the church
Mhm.
broad, right?
Mhm.
But the Catholic Church, right? Because
Mhm.
Protestantism emerges with modernity and
Mhm.
colonialism and capitalism,
Mhm.
and the Enlightenment and all, etc. But anyway,
Scientific.
that
Yes.
language that you use, right? Struck me. This
Mhm.
um, this rejection, as you said, of reason, the rational,
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
uh, yeah,
Mhm.
an embrace of darkness in that
Yeah.
sense, right?
And on so many levels, and on so many levels in terms of the challenge, the underlying challenge in that comes with these groups that are in the forefront, the challenge to empathy, the concept of empathy, the
It's wild.
challenge to the right to yes, the challenge to fundamental norms, right? Common norms of
Yeah.
human ethical behavior, human right, moral behavior, reverting to
Hmm.
a, you know what I'm saying, any kind of uh, ethical conduct is the purview of the chosen of the God, right? And in this case, the wealthy white male, the
Mm-hmm.
wealthy European, Nordic European in particular, in terms of the, who's at the center of the white
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
narrative and myth,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
These are
The heart
people,
of the mythos of the
not the
yeah.
female, not the
No.
European, not the white female,
The
not
mythos of so-called white civilization. Yeah,
yes,
that white
yes,
male.
yes,
Yeah.
is at the center,
You can say white
and
male
is
warrior even.
inefficient, even,
Even.
absolutely right. Um, and so we've got these, there is a chosen uh, people, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
right? There is a chosen group, right? And everything kind of rates out from that chosen group until you come out, right? And so any kinds of humanities are theoretically preserved for application within that group. So there is a maintenance of that, but anything in terms of the humanism, right? And the push to expand uh past, the progressive tendencies in the Western continuum to expand out of those confines and to humanize because of the interaction and the dynamism with the colonized peoples, and challenging through those values, those Enlightenment values, right? And creating these avenues for expanding, as you always say, democratic space, based on on that challenge and that platform. um just the retraction of that back to this, really, really, kind of medieval
Yeah.
value system, medieval views, medieval value,
Medieval. Right. Yes.
you know. And so when we look around us, we're talking about the social collapse, right? We can predict. We do have the power of prediction. We understand where it's going. We know what it's looking like. And part of this conversation also has to do with being uh, uh, in, as they say, the belly of the beast, the where the what is it, the residue of the middle class, the rest of the shell. And we've been talking about the hollowing out of the middle class forever,
Mm-hmm.
and the progressive hollowing out of the middle class. And so there has been this room, this padding for um a buffer against the protecting certain people against the violences of capitalism, the violences of impoverishment, the violences, all of those kinds of violences. And also the direct violence to infrastructure. You know, we living in our communities understand disrepair, we understand blight and the benign neglect, kind of factor.
Yeah.
Um, you know what I'm
That's
saying?
been policy more or less since the Nixon era, right? Specific benign neglect. Yeah.
Absolutely, right. And so when we say it's like living in a war zone,
Mm-hmm.
based on the disrepair and what have you,
Mm-hmm.
we still have not had the experience, right, since it is 9/11, you know, um, that experience of
That's right. This is the day that the
day.
Allende government was overthrown in Chile. That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
That is
Thank
correct.
you
You're
very
right.
much. Very
Actually,
correct about that.
there's a film called The First 9/11. People might
Uh,
want to find it. Yeah.
please put in the chat.
Um,
That's
I'll do it
comment.
next week because let me look in my paperwork first to make
Find
sure I
it.
got the title
Okay.
exactly right. But I think that's
Excellent.
right. The first nine. It's a short film, independent film. I think it's called The First 9/11. But I'll get back to you next week on that. Let me do my
Yeah,
research, make sure I got the title right, and can give you the filmmaker too, maybe. So,
great, which will be absolutely great because, yeah,
but I hear you.
context. And
Yeah.
yeah, essentially what I'm saying is 'cause something that, I always think about is our psychological preparation for the level of disintegration that we're about to see.
Hmm.
And something that we
Right.
always talk about in our private conversations, talking about something that I think people who are thinking about these things, because I have these conversations,
Hmm.
are,
Hmm.
these are conversations that I had, right? That we are
Hmm.
having with like-minded people and have been for a number of years, right?
Yeah.
The people's psychological readiness and preparedness to deal with the breakdown of infrastructure for real, you know.
Yeah.
That's, you know
And
what I'm
attacks
saying?
on infrastructure, right? And
Yes,
and
yes,
increasing attacks on
yes,
infrastructure that
yes.
uh, many of these groups and their various um, individualized idiosyncratic ideologies and denominations and what all these various sectors that have their own form of united front, right?
Yeah.
I mean that they have been organizing and planning at least since the mid 1960s.
Hmm.
And we've talked about accelerationists, right?
Yes,
Wanting to move this forward.
yes,
You could say they're itching for a fight.
yes, yes.
And they have had sometimes direct, but also indirect support through the neoliberal project
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
also unravels social ties, right? And certainly challenges the notion of any kind of social responsibility from the
Hmm.
state
Hmm.
or the economic elites, the owners of the economy, right?
Right.
The
Hmm.
but I've been thinking specifically, as early as what I can't remember when she says it now, 79, 80, 81, in that area, that time in there, 82. Former Prime Minister um,
Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret Thatcher, along
Yeah.
with, you say Ronald Reagan ruined everything. He had help. Margaret Thatcher, well, big help, just like, and what's his name? John Paul II. Those three, that triumvirate, right? They
Mhm.
did some damage. But anyway, her comment, right? This notion, there is no such thing as society, right? And
Mhm.
implanting that, right? And this is the
Yeah.
leadership of a society, right? Well, why have
Right.
laws then, right? Why are you putting people in jail for breaking a law if there's no society to maintain? But this is an important part of that rhetoric that feeds into lays some ideological groundwork, right? Or um, for a collapse of society,
Yes.
the kinds of
Mhm.
collapse
Mhm.
that we're
Mhm.
seeing, that's being
Mhm.
emerged, that is being encouraged. Again, those who want to accelerate these things,
Mhm.
these report, the rising unemployment, right, is
Yes.
clearly a sign of this, right? Um,
Yes.
the well, I was going to say, that there's this split in society. Uh,
Mhm.
that you can see like through the results of the election, right? The presidential
Mhm.
election, 1.5%,
Mhm.
you know, and neither candidate got a majority, got over 50% of the vote, right? And so
Mhm.
Donald Trump gets a plurality.
Mhm.
And then however many, whatever the percentage was in the electoral college, that's already the fix, right? Anyway, but
Yeah.
so that that those numbers indicate a split, along with those who decide not to vote, who might be as many as everybody who voted.
Mhm.
But these last 8 months, have been so unpopular. 9 months now, almost have been so unpopular that I don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like a solid base of 30 something percent, and everybody else is like, this is not happening, right? All the
Mm-hmm.
FAO, FAFO,
Yeah.
videos that you're seeing from
Right.
folks,
Right.
various ilks and stuff, and other people doubling down, right? Doubling down
Mm-hmm.
on their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a general sense, right? A general sense
Mm-hmm.
of unease in the society.
Mm-hmm.
The rhetoric against the enemies of the right, as they
Mm-hmm.
find them, needs to
Mm-hmm.
be on notice, because they are using this assassination, um,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the
Mm-hmm.
investigation
Right.
reveals. They've
Right.
already decided, right? And again, they're luminaries.
Right.
Several people on Fox News, right? Some of these elected officials, right, are using the language. I mean, Stephen Miller had already done it previous to this, right?
Right.
Labeling the Democratic Party as
It's
fundamentally a terrorist organization,
it's ridiculous.
which is
Absolutely.
utterly ridiculous. Well, if it
But
terrorizes anybody, it terrorizes the working class along with the Republican Party, right? I mean,
yeah.
and
But
the folks out there in the in the empire that are at the brunt of U.S.
more.
politics. But
Yeah.
this, so there, people need to be prepared, despite, again, what the data shows, right? Because this is the era, part of that dark age. As data doesn't matter, it's just what we assert and what we believe, and that's
And
got to be.
assert. Right. Absolutely.
I was going to share a little video, that just a tweet from Mediazan that makes that point about, well, where's the violence coming from, most recently. um,
Yeah.
and I gotta say, well, it isn't really changing the subject. I'm just stunned. All these years of various mass shootings, that happened in the
Yes.
United
Oh
States,
yeah.
and I'm only learning now over the last week that apparently this is what transgender people do. I mean, they didn't know that, but I mean, I mean, like,
Right.
really,
All of
all
a
of a
sudden,
sudden,
you know
all of
what?
a sudden.
What comes to mind? There was a movie on Netflix. What
Mm-hmm.
was the name of this movie? It'll come back to me. It was something like Into the Madness or something like that. And just broad brush, it was about this brother is the central character, and it's about his confrontation with this white supremacist, organized white supremacist group, and it tries to
Mm-hmm.
be this kind of intrigue and espionage kind of thing, and their involvement with the government and the FBI and this, that, and the other. But a major component of the narrative was the notion that Antifa, as
Mm-hmm.
some kind of organized group of collective, right, who are out training like militia and have all these arms or whatnot, were were fundamentally transgender folk and or non-binary folk, queer folk, and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot, or preparing themselves to fight back, but against these other these reactionary forces. But the point being was they were villainized, and this notion, right, of a
Mm-hmm.
militarized queer cadre, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
was a fundamental component of this story. So this is a thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That I think that if we
Yes.
listening, part of the mistake that we're making is not being more uh, uh, committed to uh, understanding the propaganda from the source, right? We need to be up in Newsmax, Breitbart, Epic Times, up, in these places where these narratives are coming from, like the wilding Black teenagers, like the, you know what I'm saying, and all these kinds of these tropes that are being sourced and forefronted, even the Great Replacement, all of those things, being sourced and forefronted, and are, yes, the integration, the world of spurious narratives, in which, and you see dude making these allusions, these subtle references to uh his second coming stuff, leaning into these notions, these beliefs that some of these people have, that Trump is somehow a second coming of some kind, or a harbinger of the apocalypse, has some kind of,
Yeah.
so there's
Yeah.
all of these kinds of dynamics. But go ahead, Medi.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, yeah, and actually, this is from what is this young man's name? Keith Edwards,
Uh-huh.
um, a YouTube channel, but
Yeah.
he's sharing a quote from Mehdi Hassan. So let
Uh-huh.
me share it, and I will. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, I will share it. Let me. I think. Let me back up just a little. Yeah. Let him introduce it. All right. Here we go.
Fanning the flames of political violence, and the left is trying to tamper it down or just talk about what got us to this point. And before I show you that clip, I want to just point out that political violence is an issue in this country, but there's only one side that is actually creating it and stoking it. Here's from Mehdi Hassan. The man who targeted and killed Democratic State Rep Melissa Hartman was a Trump supporter. The man who targeted the home of Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro was a Trump supporter. The men who wanted to hang Mike Pence on January 6th were Trump supporters. The man who was targeted and killed the son of Obama-appointed District Judge Esther Salas was a Trump supporter. The man who tried to kidnap Nancy Pelosi and insulted her husband was a Trump supporter. The men who convicted trying to kidnap Dem Governor Gretchen Whitmer were Trump supporters. The man who sent pipe bombs to the homes of Obama and Biden was a Trump supporter. There is no equivalent or even a similar list of Obama or Biden supporters who have carried out similar murders, attempted murders, or violent attacks. Let's keep that in mind as we go through the rest of these clips, because here is Alex Jones on the news of Charlie Kirk. Here is Steve Bannon on the news of Charlie Kirk.
We're in a war. The left has been saying put a bullseye on Trump, a bullseye on his supporters.
Charlie Kirk's a casualty of war.
They're calling it war. Here's what Jesse Waters of Fox News said.
So this hits differently because Charlie was one of us. And Trump gets hit in the ear. Charlie gets shot dead. They came after Kavanaugh with a rifle to his neighborhood. They went after Musk's cars. They just shot 2 Jews outside the embassy. Think about it. Scalise got shot, barely survived. It's happening. You got trans shooters. You got riots in LA. They are at war with us.
There were no riots in LA. There were no riots. There were protests in a very small, confined area in downtown Los Angeles. There were no riots. We know the person who shot Donald Trump was politically unaligned. He voted for the president. He supported the president. He was just someone who wanted to make their mark on the world, not a progressive or a Democrat.
That's enough. The point is made. Right, just that. So we see the language they're using despite the patterns, and quite frankly, I am unaware, right? And maybe there's a reason it doesn't make the news. I am unaware of anything that can be called left-wing violence, unless people are thinking about demonstrations where there might be property damage.
Yes.
And
of some kind.
The Elon crap, right? So
yeah. The attacks on Wemos. Yeah.
Right. and I guess
in these,
the Tesla charging stations maybe and stuff. But again, property.
yeah. But again, it's about sewing together, tacking together the elements, the common sense beliefs, the tropes that have been carefully constructed and are relied upon to explain any kind of resistance, collective resistance, spontaneous resistance, what we call uprisings, right? From oppressed classes, most usually in the context of police brutality, right? In the context of some kind of police murder. You know what I mean? So we remain in this place where people also, you believe what you want to believe. You know what I'm saying? So if you want to talk about reactions, say, to George Floyd's murder, global reaction. So this is what is this, a global riot that you know what I'm saying? But again, where reason and rationale and all of that matters, perhaps, is in the bubble. And something that has to be safeguarded. And I do think it is part of the work of the moment to be aware and formulate and be able to debunk and point out as much as possible, and to anyone who will listen, these false narratives, because so much of it rides on, as it has been and as folks have been critiquing, false dichotomy. That's not the term. What is it? False binary.
False binary.
It's not false binary, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's a false, the false dichotomy. It's that kind of bringing up these kinds of false oppositions, and the equality, of
false
any
equivalence.
Kind of
That's what you're trying to say.
you. That's what I'm trying to say. False equivalency. So much rides on that. So people are talking about shit as if it's real, because there's no depth, there's no breadth, there's nothing past these headlines that carry forward, the mainstream narratives, not to mention reactionary narratives. But the mainstream narratives support the reactionary narratives, at least, and at least they do absolutely nothing to neutralize those narratives. And of course, the Democrats don't largely, people, you know what I'm saying? I'm not talking about
not the leadership, or what represents the mainstream of the Democratic Party. Right? That's for sure. I mean, they're actively suppressing what their base wants, right? Really, and what's really popular with the base. The leadership is actively suppressing. So.
Absolutely.
It's part of the social collapse, right? The party, one party has just fully embraced fascism, and those who are conservative but don't want to go through, fascist, are kind of stuck in this limbo.
Yeah.
And then, the Democratic base, so the leadership is completely unresponsive, right, to its base. And these are features of the social collapse, right? The political parties, the effective political parties, right, that have a monopoly on power, hence that word, that has been introduced, duopoly, are completely unresponsive to the needs of the population, or even really their own actual, they're at least their constituency, right? And that's a measure of the collapse. And then the for how many decades now, active attacks on and efforts and achievements in dismantling public education, pre-K through postgraduate, dismantling public education. The efforts, right, to use crime, right, to use the human experience of crime and weaponize it in such a way that even though crime is going down, they're looking for more ways to continue, to lock up, right? And the carceral, um, the carceral, the surveillant, these are growth industries, right? And they've been growth industries, and they're having a boom right now. And so, what boom in construction is connected to, the carceral system.
Mm-hmm.
Collapse and just this total collapse in society. And they used to talk about generation gaps, right? Now
Mm-hmm.
there's seems to be this other kind of generation gap, as certain young people and um, Charles Kirk is, has his hands all over this, right? In radicalizing to the right,
Yes.
many young people
Yes.
right now,
Yes.
and embracing, making it
Yes.
okay to embrace and assert racist attitudes, right? Without, even proudly declaring oneself a racist. Since I'm not racist, these are what are the Yarvinists call it? This is what they mean by biodiversity, that some of us are just superior, right?
Uh-huh.
Those, and particularly the Northern European,
Right.
yes,
Right.
so old school. So again, as you said, taking us back, right? Taking us back to the 19th century. I mean, shit, they might have been, I don't even know if we can even use the word racism in the way we ordinarily mean it when when we're talking about the Middle Ages, right? I mean,
Right. Yeah. That's
racism as we understand it being such a modern invention.
yeah.
But all of these various, so I don't know if you were aware of this news, right? But again, I introduce as a symptom of the social collapse, and indeed, the presidency of Donald Trump is the greatest symptom of the social collapse. And the
Yep.
social collapse, scholars are saying, yeah, it's about 10 years old. This level of crisis, yeah, and it was 10 years ago that Trump comes down that escalator, calling Mexicans specifically
Yeah.
at that time all these horrible names. So all these, these aspects of the social collapse, right? That
Right.
we're
Right.
undergoing right
Right.
now.
Right. Absolutely. The capacity to weaponize the fear of crime and
Mm,
and
yeah.
also, so much of this hinges again and again on the choice between scientific approach,
Mm-hmm.
reactionary,
Yes.
common sense, folkloric approaches,
Yeah.
and that's not poo-poo folklore.
And
There's
it's
a lot of
fundamentally
folklore.
reactionary. Right?
It was
Fundamentally
fundamentally
reactionary.
reactionary
Yeah.
because
Reacting reacting to all the forms of liberation.
yes, and with all of this fear of crime, and because also, the American culture is obsessed with crime. We know the
Mm-hmm.
decades of propaganda. We've talked about that, and everybody talks about that, and the obsession with violent crime, with murder, with rape as a form of, entertainment, what the stories are about.
Mm-hmm.
Saying the stories that we consume,
Mm-hmm.
are about these spectacular, forms of crime. So we have
Yeah.
this real sense, this kind of boogeyman sense, the worst of the worst, and all of these arbitrary boogeymen that we know nothing about. And when it's said, that the majority of people that are incarcerated are not incarcerated for violent crimes, and when we begin to have an understanding of, or let me say, for those spectacular kinds of crimes, right, that we are trained to think of as crime, right? Never mind all of the other violences and crimes and all the kinds of things that are visited again in that that class conflict
Mhm.
scenario, right? But you know, in terms of what we understand about crime, about the incarcerated, about criminalization, about any of the, there's no context, there's no background, there's no something that's data driven. In other words,
Yeah,
when
and
people say,
the data is rejected, right? Or no, they don't want the data.
no,
You know,
absolutely no,
'cause
no.
the data does yeah, the data doesn't match the narrative, right?
The
The preferred
it doesn't
narrative, the
the
official
bi-
story.
doesn't confirm the bias, doesn't
Right.
confirm the bias, right? So this bias driven um and the, you know, and this kind of arrogance with it, and this kind of, you know what I'm saying, that also comes out of the, you know, well, that's your opinion, I have my opinion, and this is my truth, and all of these kinds of values, you know, that
Mhm.
go with
Mhm.
finding yourself caught up in spurious narratives, you know,
Mhm.
for all of, you know, for all the reasons and the ways. But again, a huge part of that is, you know, this is also what, when they talk about the poor math and science, and the, you know, the disintegrating education, and particularly the poor math and science and
Mhm.
numeracy and ability to calculate and visualize in that way, you know, this is what it looks like, you know, to be anti-science. This is part of what it looks like, to not be able to communicate and convince with data, with numbers,
Yeah,
with,
that's
you
right.
know what I'm saying, these kinds of things, and to even have a sense of that. But yes, so just, you know, this imminent, and this moment of where we know we are turning into this this dark road, you know, of political violence, fill your city, you know, and uh, of all kinds, you know, of all
Mhm.
kinds. It is ever more important to protect and cling to rationality, to protect and cling to sense, to protect and cling to, you know, uh, the cool head, and the the ability um, to calmly reflect. You know what, and what that means and how we get there. I truly don't know. I truly don't know, because this is, I haven't, you know, lived this crisis. Other people have. People have answers about how to you know, survive and meet the violence of of the state.
Mhm.
Certainly we do, as African people here. You know, certainly we do. Um, and but uh, we have to remember that we do, because I think, you know, for some of our current generations, I don't mean young people and people who are, you know, that generation of forgetting the the capacity for violence of the settler, you know, of the settler, uh, white identified person, you know, persons, et cetera, et cetera. So uh, I pass the mic back. I have a couple more things to insert, but I pass the mic back.
Well, the obsession with crime is projection. So the United States is a crime, right? Stolen lands, stolen people, stolen labor. You know, this is, and it's in an ongoing situation like that, right? So, and so I do think, right, the obsession with crime is because there's some sense of the criminality of the country
Mm,
itself, right? And
mm,
um, that no one has effectively dealt with or wanted to deal with. And indeed, we are in another moment of repression, right? Which is also a psychological term, right? Is
Mm,
the
mm,
overt efforts out there, bullying efforts, right, to change narratives in schools and museums, right? All the various these kinds of cultural and ideological institutions to get control of it, right? Control of the narrative that's been out of control for too long. Again, this same period of time. So yeah, I think that obsession with crime is
mm,
because of the
mm.
the kind of the criminal underbelly of what the
Mm.
United States is, and it is if colonialism is a crime against humanity, if slavery is a crime against humanity, and
Right.
those were declared as such by the UN, with what everyone thinks of the UN,
Yeah.
United Nations authority to do that. But that was, whatever people think about the UN, right? It's made up of a lot of different people and a lot of different agencies who are doing what they can, right, to better the conditions of the world, save the historical, cultural legacies of the world, whatever the leadership, may be doing, um, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera, right? Sort of the grassroots, and folks struggled hard to have that the UN conferences on racism, slavery, and colonialism, and I might have the name mixed up, right, and all that, where these things were declared, and
Mm,
where the United States and
mm-hmm.
Israel and other Western countries decide to walk out, right, because of under the pretext of anti-Semitism, right, et cetera, because of the gall to condemn settler colonialism, right, in Palestine as well as everywhere else. And this is the United States is the paragon of settler colonialism. Um,
Mm,
it has to support Israel. How can it not?
mm-hmm.
How can
Mm-hmm.
any of the settler colonies not support Israel, right? And
Mm-hmm.
without giving the lie of their own existence, right? Uh, um,
Mm-hmm.
these settler spaces. So yeah, that thing about criminality,
Mm-hmm.
and the obsession, right, with the projected criminality of the colonial subjects, um, because
Yes.
of fear, the fear of what we've done, they're going to do to us, right? Just again,
Right.
this assertion, the whole notion. Well, Black power can't be good, right? Because,
Right.
but then what about the white people? What's going to happen to us, right? We're going to be oppressed, right? The
Right.
inability to imagine equality. I mean,
A
just
just society. Someone
that
wanted.
can actually
Yes.
sovereign, and that doesn't mean they're going to
Yes.
come conquer you or try to undermine you, or that it
Yes.
isn't, that you aren't being attacked, right? That you are not a
Absolutely.
victim of war, that we are not at war. But indeed, we've been saying, and many of us act like we don't realize that.
Yeah.
Now, again, they're projecting, right? They're making the claim about what is actually happening to the African communities of the world, indigenous communities of the world,
Absolutely.
poor people in the world, the earth itself, right?
The
The
earth
earth is,
itself.
again, that part of
Yeah.
the social collapse, the symptoms of the social collapse,
Yes.
the
Yes.
inability to recognize, as you were saying about climate change, right? Not even wanting to deal with that, because
Yes.
what matters is, sort of the individual um,
Mm,
drive for profit, right? And
mm.
what was the phrase that we use in child development and other things? The not just the inability, but just the absolute unwillingness to delay gratification and think about generations ahead, right? It's fundamentally inhumane.
And the level of madness in terms of have an elder friend that's fond of saying one begets the other, you know, and just the interconnectedness and the interdependence of all of
Mhm.
these
Mhm.
lie systems, you know, of all these lies, make it so that, you know, you can't move. What is it? It's like a Jenga tower. You can't move one without everything
Right.
collapsing. So very fragile uh, ego of the Western identity, you know, of the West, capital T, capital W, you know, identity. Everything has to be, you know, everything has to be denied, you know, in order for it to survive intact, you know, in order for it to survive
Mhm.
intact. Um,
Mhm.
this other element that I knew I wanted to insert into the conversation about the collapse, and we started talking about it in terms of the infrastructure collapse.
Mhm.
Um, the As these material conditions worsen, you know,
Right.
they are right as the on right on time and on schedule, you know,
Mhm.
the tariff realities are hitting and people are seeing,
Mhm.
you know, these prices like kind of for the daily needs just vertically,
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
surging, right? More and more
I know I
people.
paid extra right before, what, an hour before we got on or something like that. I know I paid extra for some maple syrup that came from Canada. And I was like, oh, that looks higher than it used to be. And I look, oh, it's from Canada. Okay. And I bought it because it's from Canada. Even though they're
Right.
a settler colony, I want to support them in their resistance. Right
Resistance. I know it's like, you know, it's
now,
like
I want to support them in their resistance to.
you know,
So I'm like, okay, all right,
as they're rejecting our people from
right,
fleeing
exactly.
the
Is it
US, coming into Canada for refuge, or trying to figure out how to
right?
keep Haitian people out and
Right.
black
It's like,
asylum.
okay, yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this. Yeah.
In what I remember the word imbroglio from high school.
Mhm.
Imbroglio. It was a good word, you know. But yes, and what did I got my daughter some this drink, this energy drink she likes. And I remember the last time I got it, it was a couple of dollars less. Now it's, and I haven't
Mhm.
looked at where it's made and how, you know, and all of that and what's in it, but I know that it was sky high. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, here it is.
Right.
Here we
Because
go.
even if it's made here, right, it might be importing its ingredients, right?
Absolutely.
So people are
Absolutely.
about to feel that. Yes. Or we're
Are,
feeling it now, right? It's yeah.
are feeling it, you
Yeah.
know? And you know, while the you know, vast swaths of crops are failing because of deportations, while natural disasters are
Yeah.
causing other, you know what I'm saying, infrastructure pressures, while,
Yes.
you know, and all of, meanwhile all the people are responding to this psychologically and emotionally, while now
Mhm.
that, you know, as the effects of the bill, the BBB bill, you know,
Mhm.
uh,
Even before that, in the wake of the Doge cuts,
in the wake of the Doge cuts, absolutely, and you know, and now the
which is
conversation about
beginning to impact those unemployment numbers now, right? Is
exactly, which is precisely what I was about to say, precisely what I was about to say, showing up in these labor statistics, and
Mhm.
right, and the loss of jobs, but they're just
Mhm.
simply lying
And
about, just
the loss of manufacturing. I mean, just the complete opposite of the promise, right? The loss of manufacturing.
absolutely, absolutely, you know, and there are folks who, and you know, we know there are folks who are clinging, but the part of the reason why they're clinging goes back to the inability, the lack of, not inability, the lack of the cultivated sense of numeracy,
Mhm.
background, context. You can be lied to because you literally don't have the wherewithal to
Right.
identify the lie. all you can do is go with the narrative that appeals to you. You choose your personality, your celebrity. But yeah, the effects that will be meeting out of this attack on vaccination protocols,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
going to be devastating. And the
Yes.
folks that it's going to devastate are the people who can't pay what
Right.
it will cost to have access
Exactly. Right.
to. But you can't. What is it? You can't
Because
dig a ditch.
there really is no medical system, right? There is no healthcare system in the United
Right.
States. What they call a system is not really a system, right? It's this patchwork of private care, right?
Of private care. So if it is not, so to
And
the
then whatever
as
the state does for the indigent, which is next to nothing, really.
which is next to nothing. So as I was reading today, if those vaccinations that are being deprioritized or knocked out of the set of prescribed necessary vaccinations and the programs that are put in place to see that all children can have access to vaccinations, as those programs are being uh, 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 defunded,
Mhm.
deconstructed, all of these kinds of those things are going to, not to mention all of the other effects, the health effects that are coming as people can no longer afford their the health care that they've will have no way to respond to as
Mhm.
they lose health care benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and all of those that that angle, that day-to-day living, um uh and the deconstruction of the sense of what kind of the sense of the day-to-day pattern, kind of a day-to-day, what am I trying to say, day-to-day kind of normalcy, the day-to-day routine, the day-to-day, you know what I'm saying, as people will find themselves quickly snatched out of those kinds of things, and find that there are many things that they took for granted, that they're fundamentally dependent on,
Yeah.
fundamentally dependent. And so, yeah, so here we are. And so we do have to identify clearly those things that, as you were saying earlier in our private conversation, help us to weather the storm, how the storm is weathered, how we survive on all levels, right? Whole lot of talk about mutual aid these days on every level, and in every area, every capacity, as people uh, begin to, imagine how do we get through this? How are we going to get through this onslaught?
Yeah.
Mike back.
Well, as you're giving me the mic back, we're coming up on like 90 minutes, so I think we should start wrapping soon. Um, you know, what's going to happen? I mean, it is a moment of social collapse, and there are those, there are political tendencies and political actors who want to accelerate that, for various reasons, right? Um, why should the slave want to save the plantation, right? Why should the slave want to save, the slave farm? The And those of us, who have, been opposed to U.S. imperialism, colonialism, internal colonialism, enslavement, or folks who've been on a path of liberation, right? And African internationalist or Pan Africanist liberation. Um, Republic of New Africa, liberation, specific here to the United States, or somewhere like Afro or Colombia, where there are the Afro-Colombian territories, right? There's some level of autonomy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, is it a horrible thing that the empire is falling, right? That the empire is collapsing? Well, what's horrible about it is the manner, right, and the danger of it, and the way in which one needs to be prepared for it, because
Yes.
it's an unstable and unpredictable. I mean, as you say, we can predict, and again, what you were talking, we use data to predict, right? We use analysis. We use observation and self-critique, right, to be aware of our biases as we're looking at the data. But it is still just a prediction, because the unpredictable happens, right? There are always the random elements that one cannot anticipate, right? So we don't know what's going to happen, but we need to be prepared, for what we want to happen, right? And doing things to shape, how we want to come through this collapse. This has been happening for a long time. And again, I'm kind of stuck even on how long the militant right wing in the United States has been preparing for this, and it's various sectors, right? It's the intellectuals represented by the Heritage Foundation and the Hoover Institute and others, and these various militia groups. Those cells or sectors within the U.S. military, many of whom then become part of police departments and federal police departments.
Yes.
I don't say they represent all of the officers, but they are certainly an important sector that are right at home in that context, as it's already inclined to be repressive, right? And specifically repressive of the U.S. African population, the First Nations populations, including that sector of the First Nations typically called Chicane or Mexican, right? And certainly Central Americans, etc. The Pacific, all the various, the Pacific Island population, all the various colonized nations within the nations within the empire, and the working class across ethnicities and what people call race. As I said, certainly since the 70s or the late 60s, and these, I'm kind of focused on these the ideological wing of that, right? Or what I've mentioned him a couple of times, the Wally guy that used to, from Orange County, that used to be on Orange County, what was it? Public television, and then public access, for a very long time, spouting this stuff while there are people, organizing in the community, and individuals like Gene Scott, right? The the preacher, and what he represented, right? The Anglo-Israelitism, and then these other, churches. What's his name? Frank Schaeffer. Yeah, I think it's Frank Schaeffer, who is no longer an evangelist or at least reactionary, and I think is now an atheist, but was the son of Bob Schaeffer, one of these early mega preachers and televangelist, very close with the Reagan administration, and then maybe also the Bushes. He he is very clear, right, about but how long that sector, right, the the Christian nationalists have been
Yes.
preparing
Yes.
for this crisis, and indeed um, these actors accelerating the crisis. So
Yes.
I talked there way longer than I intended to about that, right? But anyway, so we're an hour and a half. You got some final comments, and we'll say goodnight.
Well, the final comment is, yeah, in the midst of this, let us reach for our blueprints, because were mentioning, you were talking about Republic of New Africa, you were talking about various autonomy movements and whatnot. And as you were talking about that, I'm thinking Quilombos, I'm thinking, there's not been a point in the history of this and the ongoing struggle of this where we have not offered uh, formidable,
Hmm.
resistance,
Hmm. Yeah.
further expanded the space, and that, and their sense of bravado is always the same. It's always the same formula. It's not different. None of it is
Hmm.
different. Um, and we need to go ahead and collect up, find like-minded folk, um, organize, become, as we are always told, Baba Kwame Ture, organize, 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 connect.
Yes.
And and that is a spiritual, emotional, and psychological, as well as practical, practical, and the entities that are going to allow us to concentrate our action, concentrate our uh, uh, concentrate our efforts, concentrate the resistance, and the uh, make our marks in the
Yeah.
further dismantling of this, because it is dismantling. And increasing and cultivating our awareness of that. Can't emphasize it, right? Can't emphasize it enough. Whatever we think we know, and wherever we are in the continuum of knowing, what more can we know? And if we're super knowledgeable people, how can we condense and share that
Mhm.
knowledge information, as you've begun to do your talking heads, and concentrate on different specific areas and whatnot. And we're going to um, make it through this as well. We're going to make it through this as well. And there are, I'm going to make it through this as well. And I do believe it. So let us breathe, and onward, onward to the victory in this. Um, let's keep on making it. Hello, Kat. That's it.
Okay. Well, the events of this week are, again, they're just symptomatic of the crisis that this country is in. Um, a place that has always been violent, right, and subject to random violence, and has celebrated that violence in its popular culture um,
Mm-hmm.
for a very long time, back to the
Mm-hmm.
19th century dime store,
Mm-hmm.
little novels of adventures of the West and all this stuff, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm. And
so
here
yeah,
it is.
here it is, right? That this is this moment of social collapse in the United States. It's multifaceted, It's happening much more rapidly than people thought it might with the the in the installation of this second Trump term. The yeah, you know, so
Mm-hmm.
we're navigating it, right? That's what what else can we do? And we're resisting and we're building, right? That's that too, right? We're building for a better, a stronger, a more just future, right? And all the various ways that the elite have you know dismantled, unraveled, uh, destroyed any kind of social fabric and
Mm-hmm.
sense of social belonging, up to the point of these recent attacks on even the notion of empathy, right? And
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
Christian ministers who say they follow and worship someone who said feed the poor, right? That when you serve the poor, when you serve the least, you serve me. And
Mm-hmm.
they're saying that empathy is
Mm-hmm.
toxic and a
Mm-hmm.
sin. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the absurdity of the moment, and it has reached its limits apparently. So okay, well, we prepare for what's happening next. We'll say good night. We can keep opining right about this.
And we
So
needn't.
well, we recognize the moment, right? And we do recognize the danger of the moment,
Yeah.
um, and the way in which we knew this was going to be weaponized. This is
Yes.
in the wake of that, the whatever the murder of the young Ukrainian woman that's perfectly
Yeah.
set up for,
Yes.
for racist vitriol,
Another.
whatever happening. So we recognize the danger of this moment.
Yeah.
Um, and anytime a society is in collapse, it's instability. So yeah, I knew there was. So a thing that occurred to me earlier today, and very close to before we were going to get on, is we're in this moment where we know things are crumbling. There is overt attempt at authoritarian control. The authoritarian party is indeed in control of every um, aspect of governance in this society. Those who are most committed to dismantling society, right, are
Yeah.
in control. But we're in this point where, despite all this and knowing all this intellectually, unless it's hitting you directly, there's a
Mhm.
there's as you there's a kind of things seem normal, right?
Right.
Life, there's a certain
Right.
aspect of life as usual,
Right.
until it creeps up and hits you directly, right? So
Right.
that's the moment we're in, and that's how people get caught off guard, and why the collapse seems so sudden, when
Yes.
the entire time it was creeping. Um,
Yes.
so
Yes.
anyway, we'll end there and say good night. And we thank you, those of you who watched. We appreciate you, and appreciate you, joining our channel to see what we had to say. You can always leave a comment. Um, and please, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel and ask other, let other people know about us. They might want to subscribe. Please like this video. Help us out with the tyranny of the algorithm. Share, right? Share the word, the Joko Collective channel for these Joko conversations. And we'll be posting again soon. I was trying, you mentioned, the individual videos, a couple that I've done recently, and I got another one queued up to do. I just got to find the time to do it. So maybe I'll be able to do it this week before we're back on again together.
Right on.
All right. You want to say good night, Tasha?
Good night, Tasha.
Good night, Tasha. And folks, good night. Once again, we thank you, and we will see you next week for show. Revelation reveals the truth, as Bob Marley lets us know. It takes a revolution to make a solution. Peace, y'all.